when you think of understanding something like the sun, is all of a sudden you just feel so inconsequential. Your day to day, like my model is overfitting. Like who cares? These guys are trying to understand the sun, and the things that they're trying to do along the way is like, okay, is a solar flare coming, and if so, is it going to knock out all the power grids and communication on the earth? So how far ahead should they be able to predict it so that they can take action? It's almost so futuristic to even think about. But then, you think, yes, AI is, perfect hammer for this kind of nail. And then you look at it and then physics hits you on the head.
Hi, Sairam. Nice to
Hey,
have you on the
Arvind,
podcast.
my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So let's get started. So before we get started, I typically do this. I, try and set the stage for the audience just to give them a sense for like where
Hmm.
you're coming from. And your career and your journey has really been fascinating, right? You've explored like a lot of areas in your career through AI, 3D reconstruction at Qualcomm, and your current work is in autonomous vehicles. So, can you take us through this fascinating journey?
Okay. I think it's been a series of happy accidents. That's the way that I'd like to think about my journey in AI. So, first of all, I got into AI because I enjoyed taking pictures, which sounds super vague. But the point is, I was really interested in like processing images, and then there was digital signal processing back in the day, which people I don't think take as much these days. But then that exposed me to image processing, and then from there was this connection to computer vision. It's like, hang on, you can actually teach computers to see, and that's how I sort of started my journey. And when I went for my masters, I focused on those areas particularly, and I was fortunate enough to get an internship at Qualcomm, and then that turned into a full-time job. But I guess like over the years, the thing that I'm most grateful for is I've had the privilege of seeing several inflection points, right? Like from traditional computer vision and machine learning to deep learning first, like computer vision benchmarks being smashed left, right, and center, and then suddenly transformers coming out, and then BERT and all these language models, and then transformers being applied for vision, then multimodal, and then ChatGPT. Been one thing after another. So just to be able to see it in like a ringside view and learn a ton of things along the way, that's the thing I'm most grateful for. Yeah, it's been a series of happy accidents to be honest, and I'm very grateful that I've had the opportunity to explore these areas.
That's awesome. And I'm sure you're not alone in feeling that way. A lot of people might feel like their journey has been a series of happy accidents. And also, it's such an exciting space,
It
especially the
is.
space that you're in. Awesome. So one of the things that really stood out in your profile was your work at NASA's Frontier Development Lab, right? So I wanted to just like double click on that. So you served as, I think, the machine learning guide for that team over there. But my question is, how does applying AI to something like, complex stuff like solar physics and so on differ from, building the consumer AI applications and autonomous vehicles and so on? How is it different, or are there similarities?
There are some similarities and there are differences. I would say that the problem scope, when you think of understanding something like the sun, is all of a sudden you just feel so inconsequential. Your day to day, like my model is overfitting. Like who cares? These guys are trying to understand the sun. And the things that they're trying to do along the way is like, okay, is a solar flare coming? And if so, is it going to knock out all the power grids and communication on the earth? So how far ahead should they be able to predict it so that they can take action? Like it's almost so futuristic to even think about. But then, you think, yes, AI is, perfect hammer for this kind of nail. And then you look at it and then physics hits you on the head, right? So it's basically physics bends to nobody. So the thing that I find is that, with consumer AI and most of our traditional problems, if I may, you usually have faster feedback loops, right? You have data that is readily available, you have ground truth, or you're at least in a position where you can at least learn from the experiments you run, course correct, and understand what's going on. With something like this, you're trying to collect data from satellites. Satellites, they may have their inherent characteristics. They may be positioned either on the ground or in space, and they may not have the correct angle for you to get an observation. And then the time to get that feedback is massive. And then on top of that, you throw in hallucination that these AI models, are richly baked in with. Then all of a sudden, the physicist will ask you, like, how can I trust your model, right? How do I know that it's actually correct? So then interpretability becomes super important. So the feedback loop is slower. You have to really think about, does this make sense, and spend more time with the data. And then actually think about what are the ways you can fuse traditional physics with neural nets, which is like way beyond any of the, okay, let me throw a transformer model at this, and then if I need to, get better performance, I'll scale it. That playbook doesn't work. So I think that's the biggest difference.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds fascinating. Um, so yeah, you also mentioned this. You said you loved taking photographs, and not a lot of people may know this, but you are an award-winning photographer and illustrator. How has your eye for visual detail actually influenced your work as a computer vision professional?
I think the most beneficial aspect of pursuing photography, and I do want to be mindful here. I'm in no shape or form anywhere close to some of the greats, but I am inspired by them. I think the thing it has helped me a lot with is twofold. One is patience, because with AI, especially training and inference, uh, oftentimes you make a plan and then the model or the data has other plans, and you have to be very patient because there's a lot of iteration that has to go on. But the more interesting bit that it's taught me is like spotting edge cases. Because as humans, right, if you think about how light plays tricks on you when you're trying to take a picture, like specular reflection could actually be some like can be confused as some kind of object or a feature, or there might be fog that's hiding something. And all of those things that you worry about when you are taking a picture and trying to make sure your composition is still 3D. Because the thing that I feel is most fascinating is you have a 3D world and your eyes are gifted with the ability to understand things in 3D, even, and then that gets flattened into this canvas, a 2D canvas, and then all of a sudden you lose the perspective, you lose depth. And photography, a good photograph somehow gives you that through certain cues. And
Mhm.
by focusing on those things, you can see where the model would have challenges when it's trying to understand the same scene. So just spotting the edge cases, I think I've become somewhat better at it, thanks to those experiences. But yeah, that's primarily it.
Wow. Yeah, I myself have not worked a lot with computer vision, but just you walking me through that detail was a great experience. Also, you are a leader of an R&D team, right? So you're not just building AI, you're also leading people to build AI. What has been your philosophy for fostering creativity and innovation at the workplace?
First of all, I must acknowledge that I'm fortunate to work with a very talented team. So without that, all bets are off. So that's the very first thing I'll say. But on top of that, I think the key difference is knowledge work is not something where more time spent on something doesn't mean more outcome. And you need to create a safe space where people are okay to fail, try things, and then fail some more before they land on something, so that time and space for them to just try out their ideas, see why it doesn't work. Because it's one thing to tell people, yeah, this won't work. It's an entirely different thing to let them learn and then see why it may or may not work. And sometimes it might surprise you. You might have biases that tell you it doesn't work, but then they might disprove your biases. So it's just creating that safe space for and time for them to innovate and think. And then the second aspect is sort of knowing whether something has business impact, and knowing when it is a case where the team wants to work on something that's technically interesting but from a business perspective maybe not of value, and being able to rein in the expectations. Because it's all well and good to have publications and all of those things, but if they're not in service of what the customer needs at the end of the day, then you aren't solving the right problem. And that's more of something that is a side project or a hobby versus something that's actually valuable to the company. So just bringing that balance, I think that's the other thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like oftentimes that's where the pitfall is, when there's a divergence between what you find interesting technically and what's going to create a business impact. Yeah, absolutely agree. So let's move on to the topic that I'm actually super excited to discuss about. So you have a book that's coming up. It's
Yeah.
called AI for the Rest of Us, and I think the release is around the corner.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So it's supposed to be a book that is targeted at an audience who do not necessarily have a technical background. So tell us more about the book and also your motivation behind writing it.
Yeah. So yeah, the book is coming out as of this recording. It's coming out in about a week and a half, or give or take a week, actually. The point when I started writing the book, I noticed that There were primarily two types of books that teach you AI. And I'm not talking about the books that are, I'm going to exclude the category where they talk about how AI is going to impact our lives or the forecasting, those kinds of nonfiction books. I'm talking purely about the books that teach you how AI works or applying AI. One set comes from the software engineering background where people who are coders will find it very easy to understand because every algorithm or concept is explained with code. So if you don't understand the jargon, well and good, you can write it up yourself in code, watch the results on the screen, and then understand it. The other end is like the mathematically rigorous kind, which is very beautiful in its own right, and there's a separate audience for that. But a vast majority of people fall in somewhere in the messy middle, neither on neither end of the spectrum. And I, to be honest, wasn't because I didn't do a CS degree. I actually did electrical engineering, signal processing. And so my education and coding came along the way, like over the course of school and through the course of work. And for me, I was somewhere in that messy middle, maybe more towards the mathematical side versus the coding side, to be honest. I wanted to do something for those kinds of people who were maybe like me a few years ago and are staring now at the AI landscape, which has completely reshaped everything. And so the challenge I took up was, can I explain AI in plain English without dumbing it down? Because that's the one thing I did not want to do. Because if you don't respect the intelligence of your reader, then you are going to write something that's very diluted and is not useful for them in their day to day. And so that's the challenge I took up, and that's what the book is about. And to help sort of avoid equations and avoid code, I resorted to using hand drawn illustrations and doodles to explain some of these ideas. So, in a way, I hope that makes it less intimidating. So, you understand things with stories and illustrations, and then at the same time, you walk away having learned how things work and the strengths and weaknesses of different algorithms we've seen over the years. I haven't covered the entire landscape. That's far beyond a single book, but I've tried my best.
No, that's awesome. That's actually a much needed initiative. I feel like, the messy middle is often ignored, and there needs to be more resources for people who don't necessarily have, the background to just get on the track maybe as easily as other people. And also, what I've noticed is that a lot of people without the right context or background in AI tend to treat AI as a black box,
Mm.
which may or may not be a good thing, but it definitely doesn't give them the richness of context that they could probably benefit from. So, are there any like, quick mental models that maybe you have explored in your book that someone like a beginner can benefit from?
I would generally say that just thinking of the state of AI as it is in its current iteration as like a prediction engine is very useful as a mental model because, as the name suggests, it's predicting something. It's not telling you something. So, like, just understanding that there's a high likelihood that it's pattern matching and it's guessing, and if what it's guessing is within what it's seen in its data, training data, chances are you're going to get a very good answer. And if it's not, then you are better off trying to double check. So trust but verify, that kind of a space. So just thinking of it as a prediction engine for most things makes it a lot easier to understand its strengths and limitations. And then the other aspect about the book I feel is, or rather why I wrote it, is there's a translation gap, right? I mean, you would have seen it obviously working with decision makers and executives. They're speaking in terms of outcomes and risks and ROI, and the engineers are going to be probably speaking in terms of loss curves and tensors and
Mhm.
optimizations. And there's a inherent disconnect of why something will work or won't work, and then just being able to like speak in a language where you're bridging that disconnect, right? That's so from for an engineer, the mental model would be like, okay, how do I map this experiment into what the business leader cares about? And then for the business leader, how do I map this into a concept the engineer can then tell me, the feasibility for, or like how long it will take to achieve, I guess.
No, that's actually like that's pretty spot on. First of all, helping thinking of it as a prediction engine is great because you're no longer thinking about it as another a sentient human being on the other end. You
That's the
understand
thing.
it's
It's easy to confuse it as a human, right? I mean, you're speaking with it, and all of a sudden you get frustrated when it's not giving you the answers like immediately. It doesn't get what's in your head. And if you just take a step back and think, hang on, am I talking to a human or am I talking to a machine that's doing a pretty good job of pretending to be human, right? So I think that is
exactly.
a great point.
Yeah. I also feel like you mentioned this,
Hmm.
want to sort of echo it in the sense that given that it's so easy to look up information today,
Hmm.
oftentimes actually the gap is in terminologies. If you're able to prompt the AI with the right terminologies, you're going to get like better results.
Hmm.
So kind of understanding how to bridge that is also super important. So yeah, I completely agree with your insights there.
Yeah, it's I just feel that we're in this amazing time where a lot of things that were previously impossible or previously took forever to achieve are now so feasible all of a sudden. And then that means that you have a lot of things you can potentially say yes to, but then doesn't mean that all of those things are the right things. If anything, this bridge has become even more important in my opinion.
Yep. So you did mention that you've used a lot of illustrations in your book. Were there any illustrations that you got stuck on or resketched a lot of times?
Yeah, so I guess the one that I probably spent a lot of time scratching my head on was around generative models, and I don't mean like ChatGPT and those kinds. I mean like variational autoencoders and diffusion models. Like for sort of the lay people I saw, I just threw some jargon at you. I apologize, but basically these are the models that create pretty pictures that you when you prompt them, they create these images. So just trying to come up with like how does the process work for those models and just trying to make it as clear as possible. I think that was the hardest bit where I spent for the others it was I wouldn't say easier but definitely like lesser head scratching.
So also another question around just the creative side of things, right? And since you do have like a very like creative bent of mind, and you're also an engineer, from your vantage point, how do you see AI acting as a co-creator that an artist can leverage to help unlock creativity to further levels?
So I think there's two sides to this, right? There's one where it's easy for us, like again, the neuroscientists in the audience might be shaking their fists and saying, okay, this guy's talking gibberish. But I remember reading somewhere that our brains like to conserve energy and then they'll try to automate away things that aren't going to help them with survival or other essential functions. So I feel like one of the things that we might be tempted to do is once these models become very good at creating things, we just prompt them and then don't actually spend time putting our own spin on it or genuinely being involved in the process of creation. And I feel like as an engineer, that's the part that I try to pay most attention to, pun not intended, but like just being able to use it as a tool to augment my own thinking or maybe unearth directions that I have not considered so far. I think it's really fantastic when you spend a significant amount of time with it, like saying okay, why would this work, why would this not work, or like poke holes into this design, or what are the things that are missing here, does this come through, like if the audience of this illustration is x y and z, does this immediately convey the point? And then again you have to caveat it and saying be honest, I don't want sugarcoating, I don't want you to be
Hmm.
diplomatic, be blunt, all of those things. And then though I feel like the feedback you get from it is pretty helpful, whereas if you just say if you find a unique prompting trick that makes it look aesthetically wonderful but has no use, like I'm talking about like the visuals that educate, not general purpose images here, I feel like that's just mailing it in, right? And it's quite easy to fall into that trap given how good these models have become in recent times.
Yeah, so more like a sounding board.
Yeah, so I would say something that augments you rather than replaces you.
So another topic I'm really excited to explore with you is your move back home.
Hmm.
You and I sort of share a similar story wherein like me, you spent a significant part of your career in the US and you recently moved back home to Chennai, India. So what prompted this move and what has it been like to move back home and how has it changed and influenced your perspectives?
I guess I think maybe I feel like our motivations are also somewhat similar in that sense, where For me, I have two young children, and I grew up very close with my, grandparents, and I spent a ton of time with them growing up, through festivals and other occasions. And I learned a lot from them, whether be it, the stories they used to tell or just the way they used to do things. And for me, I wanted to do the same for my children, at least give them the opportunity, because no amount of money or no amount of anything I do will not the time travel, at least as of today, it's not possible. So I won't be able to get back the time that I can spend with my family, my wife's family, and of course the kids won't get the time back with their grandparents. And then that's something that I wanted to provide. And the other aspect from sort of a professional perspective was that India has a very rich problem space in terms of the number of things that are here to solve. And AI is just really taking off in a very nascent way. It's nowhere by means at the level it is maybe in at least in the US. I don't know about the rest of the world. And I wanted to start working on problems here that were very difficult and messy to begin with, not really easy, and not move back at a time when things were all like, the infrastructure and everything else was well developed. So I just wanted to be here from that starting point. Those were the primary motivations for me from a personal and professional side. And yeah, just so far the experience has been wonderful and educative. The India I left is not the India I returned to. And there's definitely been a lot of good and a lot of things that are perhaps not as good. But that's the trade offs, right? With every place and every choice you make, there are trade offs, and I have no regrets.
Absolutely. I feel the same way as well. Resonate with a lot of the things that you said, and definitely no regrets about that. One of the things I was actually curious about to hear your perspective on is do you see any difference in how AI is being developed, applied, or discussed in India versus the West?
I think there is some differences. I think the thing that stands out is obviously the rate at which fundamental research moves in the West. It's night and day compared to how it is, at least at the moment, in India. And that is something that I feel like we as a country can catch up and should be focusing on. Like, if you see all these innovations that are coming out, like the cadence is now what, once every 2 months, maybe we see something fascinating that comes out. That's one of the big differences I see. However, what I do see here is a significant opportunity in terms of the problem space, like in terms of low cost or low resource settings, in terms of healthcare, in terms of agriculture, in terms of problems that affect the day-to-day common man, and being able to apply it. So my thought process, at least right now, is if you solve it in India, you're probably solving it in a ton of other countries around the world. Really amazing place to be in, where you can take AI and apply it to a rich problem space and truly make a difference. And I feel like for us, it's about moving into some of those fundamental topics. Obviously, we can't take on everything, but maybe one or two fundamental topics that would really help us tackle some of these problems and really be the frontier, or part of the frontier that's moving this forward. I think that would be amazing. I don't know if you feel
Awesome.
the same way. This is just how I feel.
No, I definitely agree with you. I'm totally inspired by the, as you said, the surface area of the problem space over here. There's so much you can do. And also, I feel like there is also a difference in the way you think about solutions in India,
Mm,
right? At least when I do a lot of automations, right? And when you just think about it from an automations perspective, the trade-off over here is always automation versus, how many people can you throw at it, right?
mm,
Because that is one of India's unique strengths. So
mm.
that also presents itself as a very, like, sort of uh, innovative challenge for you to work through, right? Spotting the right opportunities through those things is something that I personally find very rewarding. And yeah, absolutely, like second what you said about things around healthcare and how much of an impact it can actually have in India, and
Mm.
like how if we could as a way to if you can find a way to like get it to the grassroots level where people outside of the urban areas are able to benefit from it, that would be a huge win.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing that also comes with this kind of problem space is that you have these constraints, and they actually can lead to some of the most creative solutions. Where if you are given a green field and anything goes, you
Absolutely.
probably won't have the same. As counterintuitive as that might be, constraints actually help you be more creative. At least for me, that's been true. And I feel like having these constraints, like it has to meet all these conditions, suddenly helps you think out of the box. And I feel that there's a rich opportunity to tap into that.
Yeah, totally. So, just to like also, since we're talking about some of the impacts that AI can have on society, there are many people, and understandably many, that are anxious about AI displacing their jobs. But for somebody like you who understands the technology more deeply, and you also communicate it very effectively on, social media platforms. So, what is your message to them? Or what is your perspective here?
I think that this is a pretty big shift. There's no point in trying to sugarcoat, like, okay, like, AI is changing a lot of things and how we go about doing a lot of the things we used to. It's like just like electricity did, just like the industrial revolution did. And there will be certain jobs that are perhaps no longer needed because AI is able to do them at a very elite level. And I mean, if you look at a trade-off from sort of a company's perspective, on one hand, you have a worker that doesn't need food or water, works 24/7, just needs electricity to work and the internet probably. And then on the other hand, you have people who are maybe not as efficient, purely thinking about it from a business perspective. The scale is so skewed in terms of them. But then that is where I feel like the human edge comes into play, which is like, what are the things that you are inherently good at that you can use to make yourself stand out? And with every shift, there's always been new jobs that come, new or existing jobs that evolve and require a certain new skill set that didn't exist before. And being able to learn, upskill, or just focus on those. And if for a lot of people, they have amazing domain expertise, right? Able to double down on it versus seeing it as a disadvantage. Like I hear a lot of people who say, I didn't study computer science or I didn't learn about AI and machine learning. I've been working in this product space or I've been working in traditional industry like, law or something else. What am I going to do? And my answer is you have domain expertise that a vast majority of people don't have, and you should double down on that. That's your unfair advantage. And
Absolutely.
use AI to augment yourself, not worry about, because whether or not AI replaces us is not something that we have in our control. What we do have in our control is how we respond to it, how we upskill, how we learn, and how we become uniquely valuable. And so that would be my thing. Just it's definitely trying to focus on what you can control and doubling down on your strengths versus worrying about, am I even going to be relevant anymore? Because the more time you spend worrying, the higher likelihood you will be outdated.
Yeah, absolutely. Domain expertise is so valuable, right? People often wonder, like now since like AI has gotten relatively good at coding, people wonder about software engineering jobs. But at the
Good
same time,
software
it's
engineers have
good
never
software
been more important.
more important because exactly, right? And AI is also changing the way we learn,
Yeah.
right? How do you see AI transforming education for the next generation?
I really feel jealous. That's what I'll say. Because, again, going to sound like a dinosaur here, but back in the day when I was still studying, you didn't have your chat GPTs. You probably had YouTube, but it was very nascent. None of the video playlists or top universities releasing free courses, the same things they teach their students in house. Just the amount of resources available for free to learn from is staggering. And then now you throw in something like AI, which is probably the most patient teacher you can find. Because, like, I don't know about you, but if I were to ask the same question a few times to my teacher, I'm sure they'd be very annoyed with me. They'll be like, okay, we'll talk about this later. But with AI, there's this infinite patience, right? And it can test you. You can take questions to, especially on the areas where you aren't strong at. And then you complement that with something like a human teacher who can spot cues like, are your eyes glossing over? Are you not understanding? Do you have like the cues that AI misses? If you combine these two things, all of a sudden you have a very potent education platform available. And I feel that and everything is in your fingertips, right? You suddenly have access to knowledge scattered around the world and you don't need to move away from your computer. And that to me is an incredible opportunity. But at the same time, I am worried about the amount of information that is hallucinated going
Yes.
into the educational portals. Because one of the things that most people use nowadays is like, okay, give me your sources, because people are becoming wise. They're saying, okay, now you gave me information about this idea or topic. Show me where you got this information from. which sounds like a great idea. But what happens is initially you might get very valuable sources, like maybe today, next few months. But then as more and more people start uploading AI generated text into blogs or other websites, all of a sudden you're having potentially hallucinated information being used as a quotable source by another language model or AI model to teach someone. And then now that's where the disconnect comes in terms of how do you know what is true, what is not true, and that's where I feel like the human element is crucial. Like the old books have never been more valuable than they are now because the amount of rigorous fact checking and all of those things that went into it, I feel like, that's where the human in the loop will help with education. So mostly I'm jealous, but on the 1% I'm also a little worried about, are we really teaching people the right thing or are we teaching them hallucinated wisdom?
Oh yeah, that checks out. That's actually quite profound, right? I guess like, it comes down to the fact that you sort of try and automate away this process. You've got to be very much in the midst of it, and you've got to be like critical as you try and digest the information which is available in plenty. But yeah, it's never been easier for you to consume information than it has been in the past.
And this goes back to what we just talked about in terms of domain expertise, because if you think about it, that's your advantage. If you spend 20 years in law and you have to suddenly teach a course and you're worried about AI replacing you, this is an example to say how valuable you actually are, because like a newbie to law will probably not know half the things an AI model gives them. Like a particular case may have never happened,
Yep,
and this model might be hallucinating it. The people may be real, but the incident might be completely fake. But you do, and you know a way to fact check, proofread, all of those things. And when you combine your skills along with this model, all of a sudden you're such a valuable resource to society.
absolutely. So, Sarah, beyond like, the very obvious benefits that we can get from AI,
Hmm.
the big ticket stuff like self-driving and so on. What are some of those subtle everyday tasks, in your opinion, that you think is completely going to change in the next 5 years?
That's very tricky to say because 5 years in AI terms is like, a long time, a very, very long time. So I think my bet would be on communication. I feel like right now, if you think about how we communicate, we're using emails or text messages or voice notes or things like that. Those will still be there, I feel, but there might be a fundamental shift using AI, how you can get those messages across. That we're already seeing some of it, right? I mean, if you just want automated responses, you're already saying, okay, this is what I want to communicate, this is the tone, this is the audience, write me a draft. Now, all of a
Mhm.
sudden, just imagine that becomes very push button or very cognitive, where you think of something and you're just able to say, okay, just do this. You know what I usually respond to. I feel that that'll be something that we start taking for granted, hence why it's subtle, in my opinion.
Yeah, I
Would you
think so
agree?
too. I was actually having a similar thought process. I feel like going forward, almost every individual can afford a personal assistant, right?
Hmm.
Or is going to have a personal assistant, not just the people who are, the VIPs of the world who
Hmm.
need assistance really to like help manage their schedule. But then,
Hmm.
since it's going to be so feasible for anybody to, get help with these kind of tasks, I think everybody will have a personal assistant. Yeah.
So that's my guess. Whether it's educated or not, we will see in 5 years.
Yeah, it'll be fun to check in back on that. But hey, last question, right?
Sure.
For someone listening and who's inspired by this conversation, right? And who's also a beginner and they want to like, start improving their AI literacy, what's the first step they can take today?
I feel like, I mean, beyond the obvious plug of read my book, I would say, um, start playing with the tool you use daily. Like it can be your chat GPT, it can be Claude, it can be Cursor or anything. Like if you're a software engineer and you aren't in the AI space, but you have access to say a Claude code or a Cursor at work, start playing with it and see what it can do. The fun thing about AI, and I say this a lot, is we're actually writing the user manual as we go. There isn't a well-defined user manual available. So in that sense, everybody is on the same level. So for you as a beginner, you don't need to feel intimidated that you don't know about all this cutting edge research or all of these jargons that people are throwing at you. Instead, focus on a problem that you want to solve and the tool that you currently use to solve it, and then spend more time, 30 minutes a day. Just try to understand, okay, how did it come up with that solution? Or why did it come up with that solution? Why not this? Just have a conversation and just try to incrementally understand where it excels, where it doesn't. And then slowly that curiosity will open up new questions for you, like how did it get to this answer? And then you'll unlock, you like peeling layers of an onion, you'll sort of find out new things as you explore deeper and deeper. That would be the best way to start. I mean, you don't need to have like 10 courses or 15 books or anything like that. I mean, those are all wonderful and very useful, and there is a time and place for that. But if you want to just start by doing. Learning by doing is the best.
Agreed. Absolutely. I personally believe that the most when you talk about fuel, you talk about fuel density, right? So the highest learning density experience happens through friction, and that typically happens when you're actually practically building something.
Yeah. And just to, I mean, not to put unnecessary pressure on people, but everyone has access to the same tools you have. So if you mail it in and say, okay, I'm just going to ask ChatGPT about this and understand it, so is everybody else. So you have an opportunity to go one step further. It's up to you to take it.
Awesome. So on that note, I think we can close out this conversation. Hey, it's been a fantastic chat with you, Sairam. Thanks for sharing all your insights. I had a lot
My
of fun.
pleasure. It was a lot of fun, Arvind. Thanks for having me on.